Hello, I'm Bella May and welcome to the third and final video about making Alice's red court dress from the live action Alice in Wonderland. And yes, that's the finished dress. It's done and I am very excited because, well, it's done. So that's always something to be excited for. And overall, I am pretty happy with the finished result. There's a couple things that I would change maybe, but one of the main things that I don't necessarily like about it, that's relative, but this outer fabric isn't as sheer as I would have liked. I think with the original dress, this not sheer part is about the same size as my fabric, but the sheer part is wider. I would say at least double the width of what my fabric is. So I think it's much more sheer compared to the pinstripe of white material. So I think in that regard, that was the main difference that I don't necessarily, I wish I could have changed that certain aspect. But the truth is I did a lot of research for this fabric and I could not find it anywhere. Literally, I spent so many hours trying to find this fabric and I didn't even find it because I was doing all online research and I was going to LA, happened to be going to LA, which was crazy, first time. And I went shopping in the fabric district and one of my goals was to find a fabric to work for this dress. And I was so happy when I found this fabric because literally I found nothing else even close to what this is. Basically a pinstripe sheer, and I wanted it to be uneven as far as the width of the white part versus the sheer part, but this was what I had to settle for because literally there was nothing out there. So in that regard, even though I wish it was more sheer, the whole thing, I couldn't really do anything about it. So that's something that I can't change anyway, so I'm just gonna be happy with it. So I think that's kind of the part that maybe throws off the look a little bit because you have the red and the black and then a stark white and black section, whereas the original that Alice wears, it's definitely more sheer back here and you see more of the red and black through that. And so it kind of calms down these lines of red and black and white and black kind of difference, if you know what I mean. So in that regard, not 100% happy with that part, but overall, I'm pretty happy with it. And there is one thing that's missing on this, and if you know this dress, you probably noticed it, but it's the cord around her waist. And so there is a cord that drapes around her waist, gets tied, and the tassels hang down. I'm thinking it's kind of supposed to be like a curtain. This is my cord that I just braided, but once I got it on the dress, it's just too bulky and really sticks out. Also, it sticks out because the red isn't quite the same red, it's more of an orangey red. I'm not gonna change that aspect, but I am gonna take it out and re-braid it. I'll do about half the amount of strands in this. It's just too thick, so I'm gonna redo that, but I didn't wanna do it right now, so it's gonna be done later. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with it. So yes, the fabric, I cannot link to because it was in LA. The ribbon I custom printed, and then these hearts, I got basically like a glittery velvet ribbon and cut the hearts out. But to explain the supplies, that's basically it. There'll be some links in the description to the materials that I use. Not all of them, of course, but some of them. So now that you got a little bit of what I'm not happy about, we're gonna go on to making it because really, overall, I'm happy with it and I'm happy that I got to share the process with you guys. Be sure to stay tuned for next week because next week is going to be a video of me wearing the dress around good scenic backdrops. Anyways, so in this video you will not be seeing me in the dress because I'm gonna save that till next video. So stick around this channel and visit me next week for that video. Without further ado, let's go on to making this outer part of the dress. So the first step to making this dress was to get the ribbons adhered to the outer fabric. And before I went and just did the whole piece of yardage, which, by the way, this is an extra wide piece of fabric, and I can't remember how many yards it is, but it's a lot of fabric. Probably, I'm guessing at least 4 yards, and it's double width. So I first did a rough drape of the outer layer, and I did that just so that I could get a rough idea of how much ribbon I needed to apply and not have to do the whole piece. And I was just about to sit down to the sewing machine to start sewing on all these ribbon strips when I realized that that was not the plan. That sewing it was, first of all, going to take away from the look of the whole dress. It wouldn't look as blended, and you'd have these, all these seam lines going through the fabric. That was one reason why when I was planning this dress, that was not the plan. But for some reason I forgot about that and was just about to sew. Literally, I sewed a couple stitches and I was like, wait, this was not the plan. So I went out. I did have to go out to town to go buy some heat and bond to do that, because that was the plan and I forgot to buy it. So that probably just answered your question about what I was gonna do if I didn't sew all the strips on. So yes, I used heat and bond double-sided adhesive stuff, which I'll link down below. I got the 3/4 inch width and I cut that into thirds. So it was a 1/4 inch strip of glue under these ribbons, which are about 3/8 inch wide. That was basically the process, and it took quite a few hours. I mean, I'm guessing at least 10 hours to get all the ribbon attached in that way, but I know for a fact that it was way faster than if I had sewed it. So I was pretty happy that I realized that before I had sewed a bunch of the strips on, and then realized, wait, why is this taking so long? And why is it not looking right? So I was pretty happy about that. Before I went on to draping the fabric, I attached this red piece of satin, which is cut on a bias. And this is, you see this in the original dress. I don't really know what to call it, just kind of a top edge ruffle, I guess. And I just kind of played around with it, and then I sewed it down. And then there was another thing I did that in some of these pictures, you see kind of almost a bleed of red into the outer sheer fabric. And some of that I think comes from this. As far as there's this line that I tried to replicate here, you kind of see this in that picture, and I think it probably had something to do with this piece. It was like draped down, but I just didn't want to figure out how to do that and make that work, because I just used a continuous piece of red all the way around the edge of the bodice. So I just grabbed some tulle and I just kind of played around with it, did some layering so it kind of gave a gradient pattern to the red. Because, so that part I think is from this red satin piece on their dress. But I feel like the other part is could very easily be bleeding from this piece of fabric. Like if it got wet and it bled into it, or they dyed it like that. They probably dyed it like that. But I just couldn't figure out, I didn't want to mess with that, and I just didn't know what else to do. So I did the tulle thing, and then I hand sewed that in place so you don't see any stitches. And I am pretty happy with how that part turned out. I wasn't sure as I was doing it, but now that I've done it and see what it looks like with the overlay on top, I think it gives the effect, that gradient, like shade, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. So that's what I did. It was time to start draping the bodice, which personally was my favorite part of this whole process, was really just messing around with the fabric and getting it to look the way I want it to look. And I think the best way to describe how I did this was to give a time lapse of the process of draping it. I can't really explain the pattern necessarily because it's just draped and I didn't try to map out what I was doing. After I got it draped, the next step was to hand sew all of it, and that took quite a few hours. And yes, I am watching Cinderella while I do this because it was very mindless and I wanted something in the background. So anyways. got it draped and then hand sewed in place was to install the zipper. And so I installed the zipper, and yes, this is a pink zipper. So the reason for this pink zipper is basically time crunch, kind of. I forgot to buy one in town, and I live a half an hour drive from town, so that would be an hour errand to go get a zipper, and I did not have time for that. And so I scrounged around all my sewing stuff and I found a pink zipper. So that was what I decided to do. Once I got that zipper placed, I did a catch stitch to secure that seam allowance in place. We'll deal with the rest of the inside later. Right now I just wanted to get the zipper attached. Now we're gonna work on the ruffle. I cut out my ruffles and I did it very roughly. I didn't use any rulers, I just eyeballed it. And I ended up eyeballing it too large, so I trimmed it down and then even trimmed it more down up here. But I would guess it's about 6 inches wide. Yeah, not very precise at all. So once I got that cut, I ruffled it with my ruffler foot. And one thing I do want to point out, there's a large, I guess you could call raw edge, even though it's all raw edge. The seam line's here, and as you can see, it's about 1.5 to 2 inches that the seam line is away from. So you got 2, so let's call it 1.5 inches. I have my seam where I ruffled it, and then I have the rest of the frill. So I just saw that on the original and of course wanted to replicate it. So that's what I did. There's a larger edge there. So after I did that, the next part was to start attaching it, which was pretty easy. So I basically, there's a raw edge there, I just slapped it together, sewed it, and then I went and did the ribbon. So again, I used the heat and bond and just placed a piece of ribbon along that whole edge, the gathered edge basically. And that hid all that thread and such. So really, I was really happy that that detail was in the dress because it really made the whole process easier and nicer looking. So once I got the ruffle attached, it was now lining time, which is probably my favorite part about making a dress. Adding those finishing touches that really just bring everything together, but also it kind of tells you that you're really close to being done with the dress, because a lining is pretty much the last thing you do for a dress. And also I kind of really enjoy making the insides of my dresses look really nice and neat and tidy and all raw edges contained and such. It's something I think I picked up from doing custom orders, because you don't want to send a dress out that has a bunch of raw edges and just doesn't look nice. And because when someone puts on a dress, you want it all to look nice, even the inside, because you're the one seeing it as you're putting it on. So for me, that was something very important to me when I made dresses for people, was to make sure it was complete from outside and inside. And really, I've grown to enjoy it so much, doing those finishing touches and such, just to make a really neat inside, because I enjoy that. And so that's what I did for this dress. So again, if you watched the first video, I set aside some red satin and I got it cut out at the same time as the underbodice. I got that cut out and I just set it aside. But now's the time to bring it in and sew it up. And so I did the same basic construction as the first part of my underbodice. I sewed it and then I ironed open the seams and then did that other sewing line, I don't know what to call it, that tacked the seam allowance down. So once I got that done, I could attach it to the bodice. The next step was to get the lining to lay smoothly in the bodice. And so my process for that is to basically just start pinning the lining down and making sure it's laying in the right place. After I did that, I pinned the lining down where the zipper is, and I hand sewed that in place. That was basically the only place that I hand sewed it. There's one more raw edge left, and I serged that. I figured that would be fine, and it really helped bring everything together. So after I got that serged, which was a little bit of a hassle to get all this dress in the serger, but after I did that, the lining was done, and I'm very happy with the lining. Now, there is another thing that I decided to add last minute. As I was zipping up the zipper on my dress form several times, it just felt like it was gonna break. I've had really bad luck with breaking zippers. Like, on my bell dress during the photo shoot, it broke. And so I had to sew my model into the dress. That is not something I wanted to do again. So I decided to add this corset type panel thing to help reduce the stress off that zipper. I just felt like that would be a smart thing to do for this dress, especially because I'm going to sell this dress. Yes, this dress is gonna be sold. If you're interested, links down below. But that was my kind of last minute decision, and I'm very happy about that because I think the zipper will be saved because of it. So I just got that hand sewn in place. I did place it along the boning because I wanted it to be strong, of course. So I basically just whip stitched it to the boning. After the lining was attached and that corset lacing thing was hand sewn in place, that means I was getting really close because there was only a couple things more to do. And one of them were the hearts. And so again, I mentioned earlier that I got like a glittered velvety type ribbon. So before I started cutting this out, I decided to get the ribbon stuff attached to a heat and bond layer. And I got a full sheet of heat and bond for this, no tiny strips. And I just attached that to the ribbon, and there's a paper backing that keeps one side secure and not gluey. So that helps a lot because I could cut out my ribbons and such and then peel off that backing and attach them to the dress. So I got ribbon with that heat and bond attached. I then traced the heart. I have a little template that I made of the right style of heart. I got that all cut out, which took some time to cut out nearly 120 hearts. And once I got all those many hearts cut out, I can now attach them. And it was really basic. I just peeled off the backing, stuck them to the dress where I wanted them to be, and put my iron there for a few seconds to heat up the glue and allow it to stick to the dress. And on the bodice, I tried to match, you know, the placement of the different hearts and such. But on the skirt, I didn't really try to replicate. I just basically did a really randomized pattern. So that's basically it for the hearts. Really, there's only one step left, and that was the cording. And as I mentioned, I'm gonna redo it. But I'm basically gonna do the same process as I did with this one, just with half the strands. So I think I'm gonna do 2 red and then 2 of the red and gold. I did a 4-strand braid, and something I realized, 4-strand braids are really easy. I thought they were super complicated, but they're really not. Go look up a template and then try one and you'll see what I mean. It was so easy. But that's it. I know, that's it. That sounds kind of weird. Like it took so many hours to do that, but it's done. Yay. Be sure to stay tuned to my channel till next week at least, because there will be a full video showing the finished dress. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up, comment if you have any questions or just comments, and also be sure to subscribe and hit that red button because I will have more videos coming for you every week. So until then, go out into your own sewing space and learn, create, and inspire.